one pretends to be the mom, or one pretends to be the police officer, or one pretends to be the truck driver. They're actually, you could say, practicing, rehearsing for real life. That's why we have playtime. If you go to a school where they have kindergartners sitting, 24 hours a day in a desk with their face in a book, then that's not the best kind of learning environment for a child. They need to play, they need to pretend, they need to grow. Also, even when you think about adults, is that there are times in my life when I don't feel like doing something. But if I force myself to do it, and I start to do it, I actually feel better about doing it. And maybe you've had that feeling about going to church before. I always joked, I have that feeling about teaching confirmation every Wednesday night. The thought of going to teach confirmation, I'm like, ugh. I can't think of anything I'd rather not do tonight than go deal with a bunch of 7th and 8th graders, right? But I get there, and I'm not kidding. Every time I'm there, I love it. I leave there, and I'm looking at the clock, and I'm going late as usual, and I can't jam everything in, and I'm energized, and I feel good, and I get done. If I wouldn't have gone to confirmation, I would never have gotten that sense of, oh, this is great. And so now if you take that and you kind of flip it into our spiritual walk with Christ, if I don't want to go to church, if I don't want to say my prayers, well, if I actually come to church and say my prayers, what sometimes happens? You feel good, right? You're like, hey, this is good. And I actually begin praying. And whether I want to pray or don't want to pray, sometimes, you know what? Pray. It's good for you. And the Spirit is going to work, and God is going to work. Sometimes I don't feel like reading my Bible. Read your Bible anyways. It's good for you. And so if he's talking about it in that sense, it makes me feel good. But yeah, Ben, the pretending part kind of bothered me a little bit. But I think I can give him a little leeway there, because I think I know what he's talking about. Any other thoughts on that one? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Our behavior isn't always consistent with our faith. Sometimes when our behavior is more consistent with our faith, then we're not pretending as much as we are when there's a big gap between behavior.
Yeah. That's a good point. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes when one of my personal kind of faith walk and struggles is those everyday kind of things where at one moment I'm feeling very, I don't know, whatever you call it, spiritual, and I feel like I'm going along just fine. And then there's other days where I'm like, oh my gosh, I am such a mess, such a disaster area. And I think what the devil wants to do sometimes, and even our sinful nature tempts us to think this way, is that, use that as a measuring stick on how much God loves you, or just how much God you got, or just how saved you are. But that's a lie. That's a lie of the devil, is that I am a child of God purely because of everything Christ did for me. And simply faith in that, faith that I am broken and God has made me whole in and through his Son, Jesus Christ. Are there going to be days when I struggle? Yes. Now, that's not an excuse to say, oh, I'm just going to go do whatever I want, right? There is that spirit living in me, that new man living in me, that is saying, hey, you ought to do it this way. Here's a better way to live. Not because there's some rule that says you have to, but again, this kind of goes back to something we talked about a few weeks ago, but because that's the design for people. That's the good design. That's how God created us to be. God says, things are going to work better for you living this way, according to my word, than living according to the way your sinful nature wants. Trust me, he says. That's what's going to happen. All right. I got a good one coming up, and I want to make sure I get to it, so I'm trying to... here's another one that made me think of another kind of Lutheran term or phrase or concept that we use all the time. He says, men are mirrors or carriers of Christ to other men. Sometimes unconscious carriers. This good infection can be carried by those who have not got it themselves. People who are not Christians themselves helped me to Christianity. But usually it's those who know him that bring him to others. So what he's saying there is that sometimes God can work through people that aren't even Christians. First of all, true or false? True. And what fancy Lutheran phrase do we sometimes use when we're talking about how God is working through other various people or roles in the world, even if they're not Christians? The blank of God. The masks of God. Yeah, right. And so I read that and I was like, ooh, I know this one. That's like this idea that God works in so many different ways. Not necessarily always, we know ways that God works to bring salvation through word and sacrament. But God works to care for your physical body through doctors. He works through to keep you safe through police officers and soldiers. And often we refer to that as the masks of God. And Lewis kind of acknowledges that reality in that quote there. Thoughts or anything else on that one? All right, gosh, I'm really having to do edit and revise here. I really want to make sure I get to the one I really want to get to. All right, now I think we're getting close. So let's try this one. The Christian way is different, harder and easier. Christ says, give me all. I don't want so much of your time and so much of your money and so much of your work. I want you. I have not come to torment your natural self, but to kill it. No half measures are any good. I don't want to cut off a branch here and a branch there. I want to have the whole tree down. I don't want to drill the tooth or crown it or stop it, but to have it out. Hand over the whole natural self, all the desires which you think innocent, as well as the ones you think wicked, the whole outfit. I will give you a new self. I will give you a new self instead. In fact, I will give you myself. My own will shall become yours. Now, do you think I liked that one or didn't like that one? I love that one. That was like one of my favorite ones, the whole thing, right? This idea that God has not come to, there's a book called The Power of Forgiveness. God does not come to the sinner to reform the sinner. He doesn't come to the sinner to make you a little less sinful. He doesn't come to kind of shape you up a little. He comes to kill it. He comes to kill your sinful nature. He cuts the whole tree down. He's not coming to kind of trim up around the house a little, make you look a little better. He comes to do a complete and utter rebuild. He actually uses I can't remember which, it must be in this chapter somewhere, where he talks, those of you who've read the book, when he's talking about the image of imagine yourself to be a house. And he comes in, and you expect him to come in and just kind of maybe do a little dusting or something. But he comes in, he starts like adding wings to the house. And it talks about how he wants to create you into something that you would never imagine. Well, that's okay. But I suggested, if I could talk to Lewis, I would say, no, you really ought to say he comes in with a bulldozer and wipes out the whole house out. He starts from scratch. It's not a renovation, it's a complete and utter rebuild. And he builds you into something brand new and glorious. And that kind of comes out in here quite a bit. Any other thoughts on that one? Oh, I'm getting nervous. I'm not going to find the one I wanted. It's got to be there somewhere. All right, well, I'll just keep on going. Hopefully I'll stumble upon it. Oh, that's the little house one. So yeah, I can skip that one because we just talked about it. Oh, this was interesting. We'll take he has a chapter where he's talking about these two people, talking about nice people, and sometimes non-Christians tend to be nicer than Christians, and he kind of uses that example. And you know, how do we make sense of that? Shouldn't a Christian be nicer? And he makes a couple of good points here. When we Christians behave badly or fail to behave well, we are making Christianity unbelievable to the outside world. So kind of a little bit of law there for us. If you're a Christian, please don't go out there and act like an idiot. You're not helping us any. But if you do act like an idiot, be ready to confess your sin. Be ready to acknowledge that you're not perfect. It's good advice there. But he makes this point as well, and I'll explain it after I read it because I don't know if it'll make sense. Suppose we have come down to brass tacks and are now talking about not talking about imaginary Christian and an imaginary non-Christian, but about two real people in our neighborhood. Even then, we must be careful to ask the right question. If Christianity is true, then it ought to follow that any Christian will be nicer than the same person would be if it were not a Christian, and that any man who becomes a Christian will be nicer than he was before. Just in the same way, if the advertisements of White Smiles toothpaste are true, it ought to follow that anyone who uses it will have better teeth, and that the same person would have had if he did not use it. That if anyone begins to use it, his teeth will improve. But to the point out that I, who use White Smiles, and also have inherited bad teeth from both my parents, have not got as fine a set of some healthy someone else who has really, really great teeth. So what I'm saying with all that is that when we're looking at someone, you can't judge their faith based on their personality necessarily all the time. And he basically says, if you've got a really, really just rotten person, and God comes and gives them saving faith, well, there's a part of them that's probably still going to be kind of rotten. This is how it is. And if you have a really, really nice person who God gives them saving faith, well, that's great. They're probably still going to be kind of a nice person, right? The point he makes later on in the chapter is that both those people need to be saved. The nicer person doesn't need God less than the nasty person does. And when we start looking at people saying, well, shouldn't that Christian be nicer? We're making the mistake of all of a sudden deciding that one person needs God more than the other because they're being nasty or nice. But the reality is, if we're looking at God's holy law, we're all the nasty one. We're all the ones that need to be saved. Right, I'm not going to find it. I can't remember what chapter it was in. Oh, well. I like this so much I can probably almost quote it for you. So I'll try. It goes something like this. It was probably back in that chapter he was talking about cutting down the tree, not just trimming the branches. He says, I'm not going to get it quite right. He'll do it so much better than me, but anything that we're not willing to have God kill will not be raised from the dead, or something like that. It's this idea of that anything that we're not willing to give over to God, anything that we want to claim for ourselves, anything that we want to keep for ourselves, will not be raised to new life. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. It's going to drive me nuts that I didn't find it because I want to get it right. But this idea of if we think there's anything good enough in us to cling to, that doesn't get raised to new life. And what he means by that is that if we start looking at our lives and saying, well, this part of me is okay, this part of me definitely is not, this part's kind of in the middle, this part's really good, and we want to cling on to the really good parts, and we just want God to come in and kind of clean up the basement, so to speak, then we're missing the whole point. Christ came to die for every ounce of us. The stuff in our mind that we think is evil, and the stuff in our mind that we think is good. Christ redeemed all of it. My former pastor at St. John used to say, Jesus forgives all your sinful works. He forgives all your good works too. And that's the idea. He redeems all of us. So don't hold anything back. Let him have it all so that he can give you all of himself. All right, it's 11 o'clock, so I got to be done. So thanks for hanging in there one extra week until I got back. And I think we have class next. We're having kind of Ask the Pastors again. We did that couple months ago, so that's next week, kind of Ask the Pastors. So have a good rest of your day.